At 1 a.m., my son ran into my room, trembling. He said, "Mom, you've been calling me from the basement." I went downstairs and heard my own voice whisper, "Don't believe her." 1-1 a.m., my son ran in shaking. "Mom, you're calling me from the basement." I went down, and then it was 1 a.m. when my son ran into my room, shaking from head to toe. His face was pale, his eyes wide with fear. He clutched my arm and whispered, "Mom, you've been calling me from the basement." My heart stopped because I hadn't left my bed all night. Before I could even answer him, a voice came from below. It was my own voice, and it whispered, "Don't believe her." If you're new here, hit subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Now, let me tell you what really happened that night. My name is Sarah Whitmore, and I live with my 8-year-old son Eli in a small house on the edge of Maplewood. It's the kind of quiet neighborhood where the loudest sound at night is the wind brushing past old trees. After my husband Daniel passed away 2 years ago, that silence became something I both needed and feared. Eli and I used to sleep with the baby monitor still on, even though he was far past needing it. It helped me breathe easier, hearing his slow, steady breathing through the static. The first few months after Daniel's death, I barely slept. I'd wake up to the sound of doors creaking, faint thuds, or whispers I couldn't place. People told me grief does that. It plays tricks on your mind, makes you hear things that aren't there. So I believed them. I had to. Life eventually started to settle again. I went back to teaching 2nd grade. Eli started drawing again, mostly pictures of our family, but lately he'd been adding someone else. A woman who looked like me, but her face was always gray, her eyes hollow. When I asked him about it, he said, "That's the one who calls me sometimes when you're asleep." I laughed it off, pretending it didn't bother me, but it did. Deep down, it did. The basement had always made me uncomfortable. It's where Daniel used to work on his old furniture projects, sanding and staining wood late into the night. After he died, I never went down there. His tools still hang on the wall, his gloves still on the table. It's like time froze in that space, waiting for him to come back. Every now and then, the light flickers down there on its own. The electrician said it's just the wiring. But sometimes when it happens, I swear I can smell Daniel's cologne, oak, and smoke drifting up through the vents. That night had been long and cold. Eli had fallen asleep early after watching his favorite movie. I stayed up grading homework until midnight, then finally crawled into bed. The wind outside was rough. The heater clicked on, making that low, hollow sound I'd gotten used to over the years. I was half asleep when I heard something faint through the monitor. My name, Sarah, soft, familiar. It sounded just like Daniel's voice. I sat up, heart pounding. I stared at the monitor, waiting to hear it again, but the static hummed quietly. I told myself it was a dream, a mix of exhaustion and memory. I turned the monitor off and tried to rest. Then, barely an hour later, Eli ran into my room. His feet slapped against the wooden floor. His voice shook as he said, "Mom, you've been calling me," from downstairs. At first I thought he was sleepwalking, but when I saw the tears in his eyes, I knew he wasn't dreaming. I told him, "Eli, I was right here the whole time." But he shook his head and said, "No, Mom, you said you needed help. You told me to come down. You sounded just like this." He repeated the voice perfectly. And that's when I felt it. The air in the room shifting, like something invisible had just walked past us. I pulled Eli close, holding him as tight as I could. He was trembling, whispering into my chest, "If you were here, then who's in the basement?" I didn't answer Eli's question right away because I didn't know how. My mouth went dry, and my heart started racing so fast I could feel it in my throat. I wanted to tell him that there was no one in the basement, that it must have been a bad dream or the heater again, but something inside me refused to speak. It wasn't just fear, it was the feeling that if I said the wrong thing, whatever was down there might hear me. I looked at the clock, 1:07 a.m., and the red digital numbers felt too bright, slicing through the darkness. Eli's small fingers were gripping my arm so tightly that his nails left little half-moon marks in my skin. I forced myself to stand up and said softly, "Stay here, sweetheart. I'll check." He shook his head so hard his hair brushed against his cheeks. "No, Mom, don't go." His voice cracked, and that single sound broke me, but I couldn't let him see how scared I was. I knelt down and looked into his eyes, trying to sound steady. "It's probably just the pipes or the wind, okay? Let me make sure everything's fine, and then we'll both go back to sleep." He didn't answer. He just crawled into my bed, clutching his stuffed fox, and pulled the blanket over his head. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut a thin line through the hallway, catching dust in the air. The whole house felt different now, alive, like it was waiting for me to make a mistake. Every sound seemed sharper. The floor creaked under my feet. The walls groaned as if whispering. As I passed Eli's room, I could still feel the warmth where he'd been sleeping. That small reminder of safety almost made me turn back. Almost. When I reached the top of the basement stairs, the light from my phone barely reached the bottom. Everything below was swallowed in black. The smell hit me first. A mix of damp concrete and something faintly sweet, like old wood pop. My stomach turned. That was Daniel's scent. He used to come upstairs smelling just like that after hours of sanding tables. My heart twisted. "Daniel?" I whispered before I could stop myself. My voice shook. The sound bounced down the stairwell and came back faint and stretched, like something repeating me from far away. The heater clicked on, but this time the hum didn't sound normal. There was a rhythm to it, almost like breathing. The longer I stood there, the stronger that sound became until I realized it wasn't coming from the heater at all. It was coming from the vent by the basement door. I leaned in closer, holding my breath. That's when I heard it. A voice, soft but clear, rising from the darkness below. "Eli," it called. "Come down, baby. Mommy needs you." My blood ran cold. It was my voice. Not just similar. It was me. Every syllable, every breath sounded exactly the way I speak to him when I'm comforting him after a nightmare. For a second, my mind refused to accept it. I wanted to believe it was a trick of the acoustics, maybe the baby monitor still picking up something, but the monitor was off. I had turned it off myself. I gripped the railing, trying to stay calm, but my hands were slick with sweat. "Who's there?" I said louder this time. Silence. The only sound was the low hum of the air conditioner turning off. Then, from somewhere deep in the basement, came a faint tapping noise. 3 soft knocks, like knuckles against wood. It came again and again, perfectly spaced. My knees weakened, and I stumbled back a step. Behind me, I heard Eli call out, "Mom? Are you okay?" His voice was shaking. I turned around quickly. "Go back to bed, Eli. Don't come out here." I didn't mean to yell, but fear had swallowed my control. His small footsteps padded back toward my room, and I listened until I heard the creak of the mattress as he climbed back in. I turned back to the dark stairwell, whispering under my breath, "It's just your imagination, just grief, that's all." But then, as if the basement wanted to answer, the voice came again, stronger this time, closer. "Sarah," it said, "don't let her touch him." The voice was still mine, but this time it sounded strained, like it was being forced through static. My flashlight flickered. The beam swung across the stairwell and caught something, just for a moment, a shadow leaning at the bottom of the stairs, its shape like a person, but the head slightly tilted in an unnatural way. I froze, unable to move. My throat tightened so hard, I couldn't even scream. Then everything went silent, the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. I slowly stepped back, my heart pounding against my ribs. Every part of me wanted to grab Eli and run out of the house, but something inside whispered that if I turned away now, I'd never be free from whatever was here. I whispered again, "Who are you?" But the only answer was the sound of breathing, soft, steady, right beneath my feet. I took one last look at the dark below, shut the basement door, and locked it. As I turned to leave, I heard one final whisper from the other side, gentle, almost pleading. "Don't believe her." I backed away, clutching my phone to my chest. My reflection in the hallway mirror looked pale and unfamiliar, and for a heartbeat, I thought it smiled back at me. The rest of that night stretched like an endless shadow. I couldn't close my eyes without seeing that dark shape at the bottom of the stairs. Every creak in the house made my heart jump. I lay in bed beside Eli, holding him tight while pretending to sleep. His breathing was calm again, but mine never settled. I kept listening for that voice, half terrified it would return, half terrified it wouldn't, because the silence somehow felt worse. When the first hint of dawn lit the window, I finally drifted off. The next morning, everything looked normal. Sunlight poured through the kitchen windows, the smell of coffee filled the air, and for a few seconds, it almost felt like the world had reset itself. But normal is an illusion. As soon as I opened the basement door to toss in a load of laundry, I felt that same chill wash over me. The smell of polish and damp earth was still there, faint but real. And at the bottom of the stairs, lying in plain sight, was Eli's stuffed fox. I hadn't even realized it was missing. I picked it up slowly, feeling the soft fabric under my fingers. My stomach twisted. Eli had been in bed with it the whole night. He never let go of it, not even in his sleep. So how had it ended up down there? I looked up at the ceiling, half expecting to see him peeking from the top of the stairs. But he wasn't there. It felt like the house itself was holding its breath, watching me. That was the moment I made up my mind. I couldn't let fear control me anymore. Something had entered my home, or maybe something had never left. Either way, I had to face it. I couldn't let Eli grow up afraid of his own house, and I couldn't let this thing, whatever it was, pretend to be me. After breakfast, I called my friend Maya, who's been like a sister since college. She has a calm, logical way of speaking that makes everything sound solvable. When I told her what happened, she tried to laugh it off at first, but then her voice softened. "Sarah," she said carefully, "you've been through so much. Sometimes our grief finds a voice. Maybe this isn't about ghosts. Maybe it's about you trying to let go." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But when I told her about the stuffed fox, she went quiet. Finally, she said, "Just don't go down there alone, okay? Wait till morning if you need to check." But I'd already decided. The moment night fell again, I'd go down there and end this. Whatever I heard, whatever I saw, I had to face it. All day, I tried to distract myself. I took Eli to the park, helped him with his homework, made his favorite spaghetti for dinner. I kept my tone cheerful, but my hands shook every time I reached for something. Eli must have noticed, because at one point he asked, "Mom, are you mad at me?" That broke my heart. I knelt down and hugged him. "Of course not, baby. Why would you think that?" He looked down, twisting his fingers nervously. "Because when you were calling me last night, you sounded angry. You said if I didn't come down, I'd be in trouble." I froze. My chest went cold. I forced a smile, kissed his forehead, and said, "It wasn't me, honey." You know I'd never say that. He nodded, but he didn't look convinced. When I tucked him into bed that night, he whispered, "If she calls again, I'll cover my ears." I stayed in his room until he fell asleep, then slipped out quietly. The house was silent, except for the occasional rustle of the trees outside. The moonlight spilled faintly through the hallway windows, silver and cold. I walked to the basement door and placed my hand on the knob. It was cold, like metal left in snow. I turned on my phone's flashlight again, my fingers trembling slightly. The door creaked open, and the sound of the hinge echoed through the hall. The smell hit me harder this time, stronger, richer, almost sweet. It wasn't just wood polish anymore. There was something else mixed in, something that smelled like the perfume I used to wear years ago, the one Daniel had given me for our first anniversary. I took a deep breath and started down the stairs. Each step groaned under my feet. The deeper I went, the heavier the air became, thick with dust and memory. Halfway down, I heard it again, a faint whisper. Only this time, it wasn't calling for Eli. It was calling for me. "Sarah," it said softly, almost lovingly. "I need you." I froze on the step, the beam of my flashlight trembling on the wall. I wanted to run back upstairs, but the sound of my own name pulled me forward. I reached the bottom and scanned the room. Everything was just as Daniel had left it. His workbench, his unfinished table, the scattered tools. Nothing seemed out of place. Then my flashlight landed on the mirror. It was the one Daniel restored before he died. The glass had cracked down the center, but it still stood tall against the wall. As I stepped closer, I saw my reflection, but it wasn't quite right. The face staring back at me looked tired, hollow-eyed, and slightly behind the movement of my real one. I whispered, "Who are you?" The reflection smiled. "You already know." The sound of my own voice filled the basement again, layered and echoing. It wasn't coming from the mirror. It was coming from everywhere, like the walls themselves were speaking. I pressed my hands over my ears, but it didn't stop. The voice was in my head now, soft and calm, almost kind. "You called me when you wanted him back. You opened the door. I came to help." My knees gave out, and I sank to the floor. "Daniel?" I whispered. The reflection tilted its head. "You can't save Eli if you don't believe me." The words hit me like ice. My hands shook as I backed away, but I couldn't look away from my own face smiling through the cracked glass. I wanted to scream, but the voice inside me whispered again, gentle, familiar, and wrong. "Don't let her touch him." And that's when I realized it wasn't trying to scare me. It was trying to warn me. I stood frozen in front of the cracked mirror, my reflection staring back like it belonged to someone else. The light from my phone flickered across the room, bouncing between the broken glass and the shadows that clung to the corners. The air felt alive, thick and buzzing, like the moment before a thunderstorm. My reflection's mouth began to move again, but I wasn't speaking. Its lips shaped words that crawled straight into my chest. "Sarah," it whispered, "you let me in. You wanted to hear him again." My mind reeled. What does that mean? I tried to back away, but my legs felt like they were made of stone. I gripped the edge of Daniel's old workbench, my breath coming in short, shallow bursts. I shook my head hard. "No," I said out loud, trying to sound stronger than I felt. "You're not real. You're just grief, that's all." The reflection smiled, not kindly, not cruelly, just knowingly. "Do you remember the night you asked for him?" it said, its voice a perfect copy of mine. "You cried until your voice broke right here in this room. You begged for one more word, one more sound of his voice." I wanted to deny it, but memory betrayed me. I remembered that night, the night I sat on the basement floor, clutching Daniel's old shirt, begging the empty air to give me a sign. I had whispered through tears, "If you can hear me, please, just say something." The silence had been unbearable. Then a faint knock came from the mirror, and I thought I was imagining it, but I whispered back. I kept whispering every night until I thought I heard him answer. Now I realized I might have invited something else instead. The reflection began to tremble, the cracks in the glass spreading like veins. The smell of wood polish turned sharp and sour, burning my throat. My phone light blinked out completely, leaving the basement in darkness. I could still see the outline of my reflection, glowing faintly like something lit from behind the glass. "Where is Daniel?" I shouted, my voice echoing through the room. The reflection tilted its head again, and then it wasn't my face anymore. It was his, Daniel's, pale, distant, but undeniably him. My knees buckled and tears blurred my vision. "Daniel?" I whispered. "Is it really you?" His lips moved slowly, deliberately. "You shouldn't have called me." Something inside the mirror shifted, like fog swirling behind the glass. I could see his outline clearer now, his shoulders, his eyes, the familiar shape of his smile. But then his expression changed. His voice, though still soft, carried panic. "Sarah, that's not me. Don't trust her." I staggered backward, my hands shaking. The voice came again, my voice, from all around me now. It was louder, layered, like two versions of me speaking over each other. One was pleading, the other calm and cold. "She doesn't understand," said the calm one. "Sarah, get out," screamed the other. The air grew colder. My breath turned to mist. The lights above flickered violently, bursting one by one until the only glow came from the mirror. The glass pulsed faintly like a heartbeat. Then I heard footsteps above. Quick, light, familiar. Eli. My stomach dropped. No, I whispered, realizing too late what was happening. I raced up the stairs, calling his name, but halfway up I heard him answer from the hallway. Mom, he said softly. You called me again. My heart shattered. Eli, don't come down here, I screamed, but he was already at the top of the stairs, clutching his stuffed fox. His eyes looked distant, almost dazed. You said you needed help, he said quietly. Behind me, from the basement, the voice repeated his words exactly. You said you needed help. Only this time, it wasn't me or him, it was both of us. The sound doubled, deepened, shaking the air. Stay back, Eli, I cried, but his small foot touched the first step. The moment he did, the mirror behind me cracked again, and a force like wind rushed past my ears. I turned around, shielding my face. Through the shattered glass, I saw something reaching out, something shaped like me, but wrong. Its movements were jagged, unnatural, as if it didn't understand how a body should move. I grabbed one of Daniel's old crosses that hung on the wall and held it out in front of me. My voice broke as I shouted, You can't have him. The thing in the mirror let out a sound that wasn't a scream. It was like air being torn apart. The lights exploded, plunging everything into darkness. I felt the air rush toward me as if the mirror had burst. I threw myself over Eli, wrapping him in my arms. The force slammed against my back, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. Then, silence. When I opened my eyes, the basement was dark and still. The mirror lay shattered across the floor, its pieces scattered like sharp stars. The smell of polish and perfume was gone, replaced by clean, cold air. I turned to Eli. He was crying, but unharmed. I held him close, whispering, It's over, it's okay, but my own voice didn't sound convinced. We climbed the stairs together, step by step, and when we reached the hallway, I locked the basement door and slid down to the floor, shaking. Eli rested his head on my shoulder. Mom, he said softly, I saw Daddy. He was trying to tell you something. Tears filled my eyes. What did he say? Eli wiped his nose and whispered. He said, Thank you for keeping him safe. I held him tighter. Outside, the first light of morning slipped through the curtains. The house was quiet again, the kind of quiet that felt like peace instead of warning. For the first time in months, I let myself breathe fully. But as I stood up to carry Eli back to bed, something caught my eye. In the hallway mirror, my reflection smiled a half-second too late. Morning sunlight poured into the house, soft and golden, settling on everything like a blanket that had been missing for too long. The kind of light that should make you feel safe. But for me, that safety felt fragile, like a dream that could crack if I breathed too hard. The night before kept looping in my mind. The voice, the mirror, Daniel's face, my own reflection smiling out of rhythm. I kept asking myself if any of it had been real, or if grief had finally taken me to a place I couldn't come back from. Eli was still asleep, curled up in my bed, with his stuffed fox pressed against his chest. His small chest rose and fell so gently that it was almost hypnotic. For the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't hear whispers in the air vents. I didn't hear creaking floors or faint breaths from the basement. The house was silent, peaceful. But silence wasn't something I trusted anymore. I walked to the window, opened the curtains, and let the light spill into every corner of the room. The morning air smelled like wet grass and maple trees. Everything outside looked alive and normal. Neighbors jogging, a dog barking, birds calling from rooftops. The world hadn't changed, only I had. I should have felt relief, but instead, I felt hollow. Like I had left a part of myself down there, among the shattered pieces of the mirror. When Eli finally woke up, he rubbed his eyes and looked at me with a sleepy smile. Morning, Mom, he said. His voice was calm, steady, so normal it almost made me cry. I brushed his hair back and whispered, Good morning, baby. You hungry? He nodded, and I made him pancakes just like I used to on Sundays when Daniel was still alive. The smell of butter and syrup filled the kitchen. And for a brief, beautiful moment, I felt like the world had gone back to the way it used to be. But then Eli said something that froze me mid-step. "Daddy came to me again last night," he said quietly, almost shyly, as if afraid he might get in trouble for saying it. I turned slowly. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" He took another bite of his pancake, then continued. "He said we're safe now. He said the lady in the mirror went back where she belongs." I didn't know what to say. My throat tightened as I tried to find words that wouldn't scare him. "You must have had a dream," I said gently, but he just looked at me, tilting his head, his eyes clearer than I'd ever seen them. "It wasn't a dream," he said. "He told me to tell you thank you, and that he'll be watching from far away." My hands trembled as I set the plate down. I forced a smile and kissed his forehead. "Then maybe he finally found peace," I whispered. After breakfast, I went back downstairs. Every step felt heavier than the last. The basement was cold, but the air was still, untouched. The mirror was gone. Shattered glass swept into a neat pile by the door. I hadn't done it. I hadn't even come back down since the night before, but someone, or something, had. I felt the chill climb up my spine. My eyes scanned the walls, the floor, Daniel's workbench. Everything was in its place, except for one thing. In the center of the room, lying where the mirror had stood, was a small photograph. It was old, its edges burned and curled. I picked it up with shaking fingers. It was a picture of Daniel and me on our wedding day. We were smiling, standing in front of the same mirror that had now been destroyed. But in this photo, our reflection behind us didn't match. The figures in the mirror weren't smiling. They looked straight ahead, their eyes hollow and dark. My breath caught. I dropped the photo, my heart pounding. I whispered, "Daniel," hoping for some sign, some whisper, something. But there was nothing, only quiet. I took one last look around and whispered a small prayer, not for protection, but for peace. When I locked the basement door this time, I didn't plan to ever open it again. That night, I tucked Eli into bed and sat beside him until he fell asleep. His face looked calm, his little hand resting on the stuffed fox. I turned off the light, stood by the doorway, and listened. For the first time in months, there was no echo of my name, no flicker of shadows, no whispering voice, only the soft hum of the night. I walked into my room, pulled the blanket over myself, and stared at the ceiling. My mind replayed every word from that night. Don't believe her. I still didn't fully understand what it meant. Was it warning me about the reflection? About myself? Or about the thing I'd invited in when I called out to Daniel all those months ago? Maybe it didn't matter anymore. Maybe what mattered was that Eli was safe, and whatever haunted us had finally let go. When I woke up just before dawn, the world was quiet. But as I walked past the hallway mirror, I saw something that made me stop. My reflection stood perfectly still, but for 1 second, just one, I saw another hand rest gently on my shoulder. A man's hand, familiar, comfort. When I blinked, it was gone. I smiled through tears. Maybe Daniel really was watching after all. And sometimes, when the house settles at night and the heater hums, I hear the faintest sound, like a whisper carried through the vents. It's not words this time. It's just warmth, peaceful, gentle. That's when I finally understood. The voices we fear don't always mean harm. Sometimes they're trying to guide us home. If you felt this story in your heart, make sure to subscribe for more powerful stories like this. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'd love to know.